Good evening. Hi, my name is Christoph Straub, and I'm the Senior Manager of Adult Learning here at TIFF. It's a huge pleasure to welcome you to the launch of our 9th season of Books on Film. Yes. I know that many of you are used to seeing Teresa Scandifio here, the founding programmer and Senior Director of Learning, on stage for the opening event of Books on Film. Rest assured that Teresa is doing fine. And she'll be back next year. She's currently on maternity leave to take care of her newborn baby daughter, and we wish her all the best from Books on Film and from TIFF. Yes. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community. On behalf of TIFF, I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, and our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. We'd also like to welcome back Warby Parker, our presenting partner for the series, and we'd like to thank our programming partner, our incredible programming partner, Penguin Random House Canada, for once again partnering with us since the beginning of the series. And last but not least, we'd like to thank our media partner, Star Metro. Thank you to donors and members like you for supporting TIFF's charitable mission to transform the way people see the world through film as well. And on behalf of everyone here at TIFF, I'd like to extend a special welcome to our returning subscribers for the series, many of whom have been with us from the beginning as well. And a hearty welcome to all our new friends and those watching online tonight via live stream. If you enjoyed today's event, but you're not yet a subscriber, head to the box office, and today's ticket can go towards the price of a subscription for the rest of the series. If you are a subscriber and would like to change your seats to sit with friends for some of the upcoming events, our box office team can help you find seats so that you can sit together. We'll do our best to accommodate your needs. And single tickets are still available for all upcoming events. If there are any specific events you're interested in, we recommend purchasing tickets sooner rather than later. As mentioned, Books on Film is now in its 9th season, and personally, I've been involved in this series for the past 4 years, and it's been a great pleasure to see it grow and evolve over the past 4 years. For us, it's always a lot of fun to program the series. Our goal is to provide insights into this page-to-screen adaptation process and to give you an opportunity to revisit classic and contemporary films from a fresh perspective. I hope that you enjoy our incredible lineup of books and guests and films this year, starting with tonight's kickoff event, Pulitzer Prize winning author Colson Whitehead on one of his favorite filmic adaptations, The Taking of Pelham 123, which we will present on an archival 35mm print. Joining him on stage is our returning host and incredible champion for Books on Film, Eleanor Wachtel of CBC's Writers and Company. Don't forget to join us after the screening outside the cinema for a book signing with Colson. His most recent book, The Underground Railroad, will be available for purchase at concessions until about 10:30 p.m. And finally, we have many other book-to-film adaptations that play year-round here at TIFF by Lightbox. For instance, this month we present Ghost Town Anthology. French-Canadian author Denis Coté adapts the first novel by Montreal literary professor Laurence Olivier, and the film opens here at TIFF by Lightbox as a new release on March 15th. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce someone who does not need an introduction, I think, our host for Books on Film. Eleanor Wachtel has been our partner in crime for Books on Film since its inception in 2010. Aside from Books on Film, you know her for her phenomenal work as the host and co-founder of CBC Radio's Writers and Company, now in its 28th season. She also co-founded Wachtel On The Arts on CBC Radio's Ideas, and her most recent books are Random Illuminations, which won an Independent Publishers Book Award, and The Best of Writers and Company. Wachtel has been widely recognized for her contributions to Canadian cultural life. She has received 9 honorary degrees, in line with our 9th season, and has been named an Officer of the Order of Canada. Please join me in welcoming our founding host for Books on Film, Eleanor Wachtel.
Thank you. Welcome and welcome back to the 9th season of Books on Film. We have a terrific lineup. I have to say that at the end of the last couple of seasons, I've thought, how are we going to top that? But here we are with some amazing people. And just a quick look ahead. In 3 weeks, on March 25th, writer-director Whit Stillman, probably best known for Metropolitan and The Last Days of Disco, his wonderfully witty comedies of manners, will be here with Love and Friendship, his adaptation of Jane Austen's long unpublished novella, Lady Susan. On April 15th, scholar and writer Imani Perry, the author of a new biography of Lorraine Hansberry, will discuss Hansberry's powerful and influential play, A Raisin in the Sun. First performed 60 years ago, the movie starring Sidney Poitier has also had a remarkable impact. And speaking of anniversaries, it's about 150 years since Louisa May Alcott's classic Little Women. On May 6th, we have Robin Swycourt, the screenwriter of the 1994 Gillian Armstrong adaptation, starring Susan Sarandon, Winona Ryder, Kirsten Dunst, Claire Danes, you won't believe Claire Danes, and Christian Bale. Robin is also a producer of a new version directed by Greta Gerwig that's coming out at the very end of this year. On June 3rd, the award-winning poet, novelist, and film enthusiast Michael Ondaatje will be here to talk about one of his favorite movies, John Boorman's 1967 neo-noir thriller, Point Blank, adapted from the novel by Richard Stark, a.k.a. Donald Westlake, starring Lee Marvin. To wrap up the season on June 24th, I was about to say a personal favorite, but many of these are also favorites. So let's say something that you're perhaps slightly less familiar with, but is really excellent. English novelist Rachel Seifert writes powerful fiction that explores moral responsibility, courage, and fear, especially at times of great upheaval. Her compelling novella and the 2012 movie Laura draws on her own family legacy of Nazism. Now on to this evening's entertainment. To introduce tonight's program of the 1974 movie, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, it involves several layers, which I'll try to outline briefly. There's the author of the book, the director of the film, and a very special multi-award-winning guest, the writer Colson Whitehead. First, the novel. John Godey is the pen name of Morton Friedgood, a New York writer and movie studio publicist. He was born in Brooklyn in 1912, studied at City College and NYU. After the Second World War, after fighting in the Second World War, he worked in public relations for United Artists, 20th Century Fox, and Paramount. At the same time, in the 1940s, he had stories in Cosmopolitan, Esquire, Collier's, and other magazines. He started publishing novels under his own name and then decided he would adopt a nom de plume borrowed from the 19th century woman's journal, Godey's Ladies Book, for his crime writing. He achieved commercial success with the John Godey books, with titles such as A Thrill a Minute with Jack Albany, Never Put Off Till Tomorrow, What You Can Kill Today, and The Three Worlds of Johnny Handsome. His 1973 title, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, was an immediate hit, and movie rights were sold so quickly that this film came out in just a year later. Friedgood, by the way, died in 2006, age 93. Now, the filmmaker. Over a 50-year career in film and television, winning 4 Primetime Emmys and 2 Directors Guild of America awards, Joseph Sargent is best known as the director of The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. It was the headline on his obituary of the New York Times when he died in 2014 at the age of 89. Clearly, the thriller business is good for one's own longevity. Joe Sargent was born Giuseppe Sorgente in 1925 in Jersey City. He started making films with boyhood friends after his father gave him an 8mm camera at the age of 11. Like Friedgood, he served in the Army during the Second World War. Then he started out at New York Actors Studio. He studied there before moving to Los Angeles in the early 1950s. He worked as a television actor, but quickly turned to directing when given the opportunity to direct an episode of Lassie. He went on to direct The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Star Trek, Gunsmoke. Yes, I know, who knew? Sargent made his first feature in 1970, a science fiction thriller called Colossus, the Forbin Project, involving a supercomputer to control weapon systems. And just a sidebar, the Canadian actor Gordon Pinsent played the American president in that film. Sargent made 8 other films during the 70s and 80s, but then went back to mostly made-for-TV movies, often based on strong biographical and historical subjects. Saying that he thought that they were just doing a caper movie, Sargent was surprised by the admiration that The Taking of Pelham elicited, especially amongst his fellow directors such as Oliver Stone and Quentin Tarantino, whose own heist debut, Reservoir Dogs, featured a sort of homage to naming his characters' colors as they are in the movie Pelham. Though that touch in Sargent's film was the invention of the screenwriter Peter Stone, who also wrote Charade and Mirage from the early 1960s. Just to put The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 into its context, what's called the grimy New York movies of the 1970s, it had the same cinematographer and editor as The French Connection, which was made 3 years earlier. Also, although it was considered a coup to actually shoot The Taking of Pelham in the New York subway system, and it cost a lot of money. They had to pay $275,000, this is in 1974 dollars, plus an extra $75,000 anti-hijack insurance. Sargent said that making it was hell on earth. They were in a black hole for 8 of the 10 weeks of shooting. The crew had to wear surgical masks because of all the dust and debris. But it's that very grittiness of the period, the grim realism and authentic locations, the slangy articulation that captures the mood of the city that made it another New Yorker, Colson Whitehead's, choice for books on film. Even before his remarkable million copy bestseller, The Underground Railroad, Colson Whitehead was known for winning major prizes such as the $500,000 MacArthur Genius Award, Guggenheim Fellowship, also for his wide-ranging, genre-defying, and difficult to say, style. Each book is something different, though right from his first novel, The Intuitionist, he was getting compared to Ralph Ellison and Toni Morrison, not to mention Dashiell Hammett. Now he gets compared to Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Jonathan Swift. Colson Whitehead is 49 years old. He was born in New York City. He studied at Harvard. He worked for 6 years at the Village Voice, where he wrote reviews of television, books, and music. It was around that time that he started writing fiction, but he was adamant about not doing the obvious. No Gen X, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, nothing autobiographical, no Southern novel of Black misery, as he put it. So he wrote a kind of mystery about a Black elevator inspector whose career is sabotaged by her white co-workers. He followed The Intuitionist with John Henry Days, an investigation of the steel-driving man of American folklore. Since then, Whitehead has published autobiographical work, both fiction, Sag Harbor, and non, The Colossus of New York, A City in 13 Parts. And yes, with his 6th novel, The Underground Railroad, he did tackle slavery in the American South, though of course in his own unconventional way. The book was an Oprah pick, a Pulitzer Prize winner, a National Book Award winner. It also won a Carnegie Medal for fiction and was a #1 New York Times bestseller. It is a thrill to welcome Colson Whitehead.
Howdy. Howdy. Thanks for having me, and thanks all you nice folks for coming out. I'm really excited for you to see The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. Last week, as the day was approaching, I was thinking, you know, did I pick the right movie or not? And I rewatched on Saturday, and I heard the first 2 sort of horn blasts of the soundtrack, and I was like, yes, that was a good choice, and survived my 10th screening of the film. So I'm supposed to point out a moment to watch for, the last 10 seconds, but you'll probably be there for that. But Robert Shaw, who I mostly associate now with Jaws, he plays the fisherman Quint, and he's a very broad performance. You know, like you put the cage in the water, you go in the water, the shark in the water. I'm not sure where he got the accent from, but in this movie he plays a British mercenary, and he has you know, a cast of other fellow heisters. So there's 2 moments. One where he's on the platform, the first 10 minutes, confronted with a young, dapper Black man who says something to him. And you see like this weird thing on his mouth, a kind of strange smile. And is he amused at New Yorkers, just humanity in general? He sort of has this very superior attitude throughout the movie. It returns later when Martin Balsam, one of the other robbers, is describing when he was how he got fired, and he's sort of taking it all in. He sees this sort of ridiculous human spectacle that he's above, but also a part of. And compared to his really broad performance in Jaws, it's a really sort of understated, bemused smile, which I really adore. So I hope you enjoy the movie as well, and we'll check you later.
I have one other thing just to, by way of context, that the movie was not only shot in the New York subway system, but also in Gracie Mansion, the residence of the mayor of New York. And Lee Wallace, who plays the mayor, looks a lot like Ed Koch. And it even seems like kind of a spoof of Ed Koch, but Koch didn't become mayor for another 4 years. The mayor at the time of the shooting was John Lindsay, and then he was replaced by Abe Beame. But it was because of John Lindsay that they were able to shoot in New York, because he was the one who created the Office of Film, Theater, and Broadcasting. So the movies like the Pelham and the grimy New York genre were able to be made. So that's all.
Very good.
Just while I remember, the woman who's meditating on the train, doing and then she says stop, is a meditation. It's Joe Sargent's wife. You grew up in the 1970s when New York was, as you've put it, at its pitiful worst. What was it like for you?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's sort of captured on there. I mean, I think one of my earliest memories of being in the city is riding in one train and standing in the front car in the front window and watching a sort of launch into the tunnel to where it becomes the elevated. And my brother and I had the same like sort of dark green jackets with the fake fur. And so seeing this movie for the first time when I was like 7 or 8 just reminded me of being sort of toddler in the city. It's dirty. Everyone's yelling at each other. Like seeing this movie again on this weekend, everyone's just yelling all the time. And there's a sort of very angry vibe, and that's the sort of crucible of my childhood. Dirty and angry.
You grew up on the Upper East Side in the 1970s?
Various places.
Yeah, and family moved around and so on. Did you experience the violence at all? Because you've said that when you hit 5 feet tall, your father told you that as a black male, you were a target.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've been stopped by cops, handcuffed, interrogated for being black in the wrong place. And that's, being black in America. I think at any moment you can turn the wrong corner and be picked up, and your life can change. The same way that these people sort of get on a subway car and suddenly they're out of their ordinary lives and in a much different trajectory.
Like the central character in your novel, Sag Harbor, you went to a private school that was mostly a white high school in Manhattan. How did you find that?
It was very odd. You'd go to school and study English, math, take gym, have lunch. Was that your experience in high school?
Well, your character in Sag Harbor, who is not necessarily you, but he says that going to a predominantly white school was like he'd been blindfolded and thrown down a well.
Yeah, I mean, the characters, the book is about being a teenager and doing a lot of identity formation. And he's a black kid who likes Susie and the Banshees in 1983. And it's the early days of hip hop. Can you like Run DMC and Susie and the Banshees? And so in the book, he grows up in Manhattan and goes out to Sag Harbor, Long Island each summer to a black community, and hangs out with his black peers, and sort of toggling between those two experiences makes up the bulk of the book.
And the bulk of your experience?
Back in the day, yeah.
You've written about being a bit of a shut-in, not interested in sports, preferring to stay at home, watch TV, especially if it's horror movies or science fiction. What was the appeal of those films?
Well, I mean, if you stay home, you don't have to talk to anybody. So that was a plus, and definitely being a writer, I get to hang around and not talk to people, and that's part of the pleasures of working at home.
I was thinking more when you're 8 or 9.
Yeah, I mean, retreating into the Twilight Zone, watching The Outer Limits, reading comic books, science fiction, watching matinee films like Taken Pelham 1, 2, 3 or Forbidden Planet. It was a great escape, and I think a lot of people my age who are writers read comic books, consumed science fiction, and I think my peers wanted to either write the X-Men or draw the X-Men or be in the X-Men, and it was good grounding for being a writer, and I think I switched genres a lot, and that's from loving different kinds of stories, horror, straightforward coming of age, science fiction, and seeing the validity in all these different sort of storytelling forms.
You would watch with your younger brother, especially when you moved to Midtown. You're a video store. You describe about how your parents were also enthusiasts. Did you talk about what you were watching when you watched with your parents?
Well, I mean, my brother and I would go to Crazy Eddie's, which was a video store in the neighborhood. Every Friday, get like 5 video, VHS or Betamax cassettes, and watch them the whole weekend. And if my parents were home, we'd watch them with them. We got cable as soon as it was invented, because if you have cable, you don't have to talk to each other. And so we were on the cutting edge of a lot of home entertainment technology. And I remember watching, Clockwork Orange when I was like 9, and with my parents, and being like, "What's happening to that woman?" And my mother being like, "It's a communist society. Now be quiet. I want to hear the Beethoven." So my brother and I consumed a lot of pop culture together, and our love for horror and science fiction was handed down from our parents.
Did you get nightmares?
I did for many years. I saw Dawn of the Dead and I Living Dead very early, and for decades would have like a zombie dream once a month. And depending on what was happening in my life, the zombies were fast, they were slow, they'd catch me, they would talk. And then doesn't happen often, but I got a book idea out of it. Usually you have a dream and you write down the notes in the middle of the night and look in the morning. It doesn't make any sense. In this case, about 11 years ago, I had a zombie dream. And in the dream, I didn't know if I could go into my living room because they hadn't swept the zombies out yet. I had house guests. The house guests were zombies. I wanted to, And it seemed when I woke up, it's not just a weird idea for a book. What do you do when the apocalypse is over? You have to clear out the extra zombies, like they're extra house guests. So I had a lot of horror dreams growing up, and I actually got a book out of one. I was very happy.
Well, and you were in therapy for a while. Were these zombie dreams useful?
In therapy? No. My mother, work, the usual. George Romero didn't figure that
didn't come up.
Yeah.
Didn't come up because you're saying that your parents didn't believe in censorship. I'm quoting: "We enjoyed beheadings, disembowelings, sexual assaults, all sorts of flickering R-rated depravity."
Well, yeah, Thanksgiving. We had the video cassettes from Crazy Eddie, and it's Dario Argento movie. It's an early Cronenberg movie like Rabid or They Came From Within, Toronto Sun. And we would have turkey and then watch a bunch of horror movies. Seems like normal. Is that normal?
No.
Okay. All right.
And they wouldn't talk about it.
Talk about in what way?
About the movies, what you were watching, anything?
We didn't discuss it and sort of analyze it. We'd say, "Oh, Tom Savini is really a special effects master." If you compare the special effects in Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Dawn of the Dead, he's really come very far in terms of bladder effects and fake-looking blood. So it was more technical as opposed to content.
You wrote, as you say, you got a novel out of it, as Zone 1, and it's your own horror novel set in a New York zombie universe. You said, "My idea of New York has always been damaged and post-apocalyptic, so it wasn't hard to imagine it."
Well, I think, I saw The Warriors like opening day, and for me that was like a documentary. And I think if you don't have to go very far to find the apocalyptic in New York. If you just go to Whole Foods on a weekend and you see people sort of shuffling, the apocalyptic is much closer than you think. So Zone 1 is my attempt at writing a utopian New York novel. Everyone's dead. There's no line for taxi cabs or a supermarket, and no one's bugging you.
The last time we talked, you mentioned that, and I said that sounds much more like dystopian, where everybody's dead.
Well, you're Canadian.
Now, your maternal grandfather owned a chain of funeral homes in New Jersey. Is that any connection to your interest in zombies?
No, not really. It's a job,
Because he was the one who built the recreational property in Sag Harbor. As I understand it, he died when you were young, but your mother was raised in the house where they did embalmings and had the services, and her sisters or your aunts the business is still operating?
Yep.
And so did this seem to make death more natural to you, or was it embarrassing that there was this funeral home in the family? Or?
I didn't grow up with it, so not really. It seems like a legit job. Some people are doctors, some people are undertakers, some people are film critics.
Coming back to the taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
Do you remember what you thought the first time you watched it? This is when you were like 8 or 9 or something.
It's fast. It's taut. I remember the last 10 seconds with the Gesundheit, and the book doesn't actually have that in it.
Yeah.
They sort of added it. And
Peter Stone's screenplay, I think.
They streamlined a lot of the cop characters, so Walter Matthau gets a lot of the great lines. And I'm sure it probably wasn't my first twist ending or sort of shock ending, but I love seeing, still Walter Matthau peeking his head in. He called himself the Ukrainian Cary Grant. And definitely in that moment, he does shine in his Ukrainian Cary Grantness.
What do you think is the appeal of a heist movie?
For me, it's the perfection that always goes wrong. It's undone by human frailty. So you can have this incredible plan, and you can execute it well, and then something always goes wrong. And that's usually the human element. In this case, Martin Balsam could have gotten away, but he started haranguing Walter Matthau about how much he hates the TA. And if he just kept his mouth shut instead of sort of preening in this moment of pride, maybe he wouldn't have coughed until 2 minutes later. And so his own need to show off and stick his middle finger in the face of the TA one last time sort of undoes him. And so you always know the heist goes wrong. And we're rooting for, and I think in general, we're rooting for the criminals and waiting for that sort of recognizable human flaw to express itself.
But then when we're rooting for the criminals, we want them to get away with it.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Unless the non-criminals are Walter Matthau. Because it tilts it a little bit in this one.
There's different scenarios. There's one heist movie I've been trying to go back to, Rififi, but it's not on DVD. Well, it is on DVD, but not on streaming. And so I've been working on that sort of heist thing, and I have to see Rififi. It has this great heist sequence that was lifted for Mission Impossible, the first Brian De Palma one. And for me, that's my heist is actually watching Rififi, because I can't get anywhere. I don't have a DVD player anymore. Every 6 months, I'm like, is Rififi streaming again? The Criterion Channel has it, and then the Criterion Channel goes defunct. So there are different kinds of heists. Sometimes you're rooting for people to get away, sometimes not, and there's a variety.
When did you read John Godey's novel?
We had it in our house. My parents bought a lot of commercial thriller fiction. So in high school, it was around. I had to buy a new edition to prep for this for this talk.
And what did you?
I remember being more faithful than it actually was. Like going through it this weekend, for one thing, it's basically a screenplay. Like, it's cut into very short scenes and didn't need that much translating for a screenplay. A lot of the characters are sort of, they cut down the cast. It's a very big sort of panoramic cast. I said Walter Matthau got a lot of the different cop parts. In the book, he doesn't
it's
actually...
kind of an amalgam of a few characters.
He doesn't arrest Martin Balsam at the end. It's a different different cop. And so the choices, sort of make sense in terms of streamlining. There's a lot more casual racism. I think there's a lot of casual racism and sexism in the movie, and also in the book, it's even sort of more unfiltered.
Just in case you have people who haven't read the book might want to know that. So it was Peter Stone who introduced the sneeze, and apparently there was a character in Charade for which he wrote the screenplay who sneezed, and so he sort of lifted that sneeze and gave it to the character here. In the book, what happens is the Martin Balsam character jumps out goes out the back window, goes out the fire escape, jumps, and then the cop is waiting for him at the bottom, and he kind of lands in his arms. So just.
Yeah,
but it's the sneezes kind of makes this one. John Godey's book, I mean, it shifts perspective between the different characters, and I know it's not the same, but I was wondering if there was something that you were kind of doing in your book, The Colossus of New York, subtitled "The City in 13 Parts," by just sort of shifting, just floating between different characters. That's a little bit like what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't thinking of the movie, but in terms of the sort of great chorus you get in a subway car, you get the rich person, the poor person, the person who's had a terrible day, the person who's going to some great event. We're all trapped in this, car shelling through the darkness. And the narrator in The Colossus of New York, my book of essays about the city, is always sort of jumping in and out of different people's heads. In the same way that if you're walking 5 blocks across the city, your mind is going to happy places, terrible places in those 3 minutes. The narrator of the book is sort of jumping around. And I think the adaptation is very nimble in terms of really drawing the people in the subway car very quickly. And part of it's clothes, and part of it's the way they talk, and part of it's slang. But I think what I like about the adaptation is that it is very efficient. You have the new motorman who, in sort of auditioning for his job, gets to explain how it works. You have the Japanese tourists. So Walter Matthau gets to convey some information for the benefit of the audience.
Yeah, there's like one line in the book that about I was curious to know if the Japanese they aren't tourists. I thought they were like visitors from the Osaka or the Japanese, the Tokyo subway. And it's kind of slightly cringe-making that the way he mocks them, and especially if anyone's been to Japan will know that their subway system is infinitely better than anything in North America. But in the book, there's just like one line where one of the characters who's working at headquarters says, "Oh, we had to show some Japanese person around," and it's built up for Matthau's comedy effect.
Well, it becomes like this, this sort of trope in movies in 70s and 80s. I mean, I think, looking back, we're like, so they actually put this in the movie? I think a 50-something white guy works for the transit authority, obviously, quite possibly racist. But they would have cut out a lot of gratuitous stuff with like the nurse in the mayor's office. The stuff that makes you sort of like, they wouldn't put that in now, but makes perfect sense for the reality of who these people are.
I think John Godey's book is much darker than the film, not only because it doesn't have Walter Matthau in it, but because the novel is much more explicitly racist as well as sexist, but really it's aggressive, violent. I mean, even the graffiti on page 3 is unspeakable. I mean, I can't say what it is, and it's just almost nonchalant. I mean, did you find that disturbing to read? Do you remember when you first read it?
Well, I think when I was a kid, I mean, that was sort of the reality of a lot of fiction. It's not intended for 12-year-old black kids, and so that's sort of a standard in a lot of pop culture. I think it's sort of funny that when they shot Pelham 1, 2, 3, they wouldn't allow to have any graffiti on the subway cars. So the mayor the New York City said you can shoot in a subway, but you can't have subway cars with graffiti because it's just a fad that's going to it's going to die out. And so, of course, that sort of PC sanitization is already happening in '74. What do you want to see on screen? What do we not want to see?
But you understand why the movie is much less racially inflected? You understand why they would do that?
Well, I think, I'm not sure. Why do you think?
Well, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Was it discernible even in 1974 that this maybe wasn't the best way to present the material?
Well, I think, it was the heyday, not just sort of, but you had the rise of blaxploitation around there, '74. There's that one sort of joke where Malta Math was like, "Oh, you're a black fellow, you're not what I expected."
He says, "I thought you would be taller."
Yeah, you're not what
I thought you would be shorter.
You're not what I expected. And I think it's, there is some realization that not actually only white people go to the movies,
The soundtrack in the Taking of Pelham, I mean, you alluded to it right at the beginning. It's very 1970s, the best of that kind of dissonant jazz. David Shire also did Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation the same year. You often write to your own soundtrack. Can you talk a bit about how you engage with music?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in New York City. It's very loud. There was always like a police siren going by or an ambulance or someone being choked to death upstairs and there are screams coming through. So I've always been used to writing with noise around. And so whether it was homework or in college, and now my books, I have like a 3,000 song playlist, and it goes from The Clash to like Edith Piaf to Run DMC to Daft Punk. And I was at a party in France. I was on a book tour, and I heard this song. I was like, "What is it?" And it was the theme to Taking Pelham 1, 2, 3. And so I bought it, and now it's part of my work rhythm. And it comes up every couple days next to Wayne Newton and or whoever he's with.
Is it a mix? I mean, it's
a mix.
Is it on mix?
It's just like 3,000 songs I like, and it keeps me company. If I get bored, I can have a dance party. If I feel like singing, I can sing along. But there are a lot of fast songs that I can put on in the morning. Gets me, with 2 cups of coffee.
You can write with the music on?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Lyrics?
It's
okay.
Slow, fast, yeah.
I have to admit to enjoying certain trivia gossip. So David Shire was married to Francis Ford Coppola's sister, Talia Shire.
I did not know that. Well, there you go.
The novel you're working on now is a crime story set in Harlem in the 1960s. What drew you to that world?
Movies like this? I'm not sure. I mean, I think it was the heist, the sort of platonic heist. The heist that goes wrong, the heist that people get away with, Ocean's 11. And having that sort of the nimble cast of characters. Everyone has their own sort of specialty. Will they pull it off? Will they not pull it off? And I think, I try to write about contemporary New York and never always kind of shy away from it. So like Zone 1, the zombie novel, takes place in the future. The Intuitionist, my first book, takes place in a sort of alternative 20th century America. And then I think that in writing about 60s New York, I can maybe address certain things, but still maybe not talk about contemporary. I don't know.
Certain things like, I mean, you weren't born yet, so.
How this, it's sort of early to talk about the book, but what's happening in 1960s in terms of real estate and riots and race. How does it compare to what's happening now? When I was watching Taking a Pelham just now, on Saturday, I was taking down the names of different cafeterias in the background, and I have to research whether the banisters in the subway are yellow or red in 1964. So all this I see a movie now like Taking 1, 2, 3, and I'm always sort of drawing in like, how can I maybe repurpose this for my book? What kind of vending machines did they have in 1964 in the subway? And so it becomes an inspiration in terms of a movie I like when I'm 10, and then when I'm 49, what can I steal, or what kind of genuine artifacts of New York are preserved in this fictional film.
So you excuse me. You actually started that book before your upcoming novel, The Nickel Boys, which is coming out in July. What was so compelling about that story?
The Nickel Boys is about it's based on the true story of a reform school in Florida called the Dozier School for Boys. It operated for 100 years, and they took in nonviolent juvenile delinquents and also orphans and wards of the state. And as happens in places like that, whether it's a reform school or an orphanage or a residential school where there's not a lot of supervision, there's a lot of abuse. And that's people being abused physically, sexually. Guards killed some students and buried them in a secret graveyard. And it sort of broke in the news in 2014. They started digging up the bodies, and people started addressing what happened in this place. And it seemed I wanted to write about it. I wanted to speak for these kids who never had their story told. But having written a book about slavery, the Underground Railroad, I didn't want to write two incredibly depressing books back to back. So it seemed like the crime novel would be a good opportunity to do something different. And then Trump got elected, and I had to sort of figure out for myself how America could go down the tube so quickly or revert to its racist mean so quickly. And so writing the book became a way of figuring out for myself how I feel about where we are as a country. There's a kid in the book. It takes place in the 60s. He's very optimistic and influenced by Martin Luther King, and he thinks that he can affect change by following Dr. King's example. There's another kid who's more streetwise and more pessimistic, who's not so sure that the world is changing. And I feel I wrestle with that in my own life, these two different ways of feeling about the world. How do you explain someone like Obama, and how do you explain someone like Trump? And so it seemed to make sense just in terms of figuring out where my country is at to write the Nickel Boys.
The Underground Railroad is being made into an 11-part Amazon series by Barry Jenkins, famous for, of course, for Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk. I understand when you and he first spoke about it, he hadn't yet catapulted into celebrity, but you liked his ideas for the adaptation. What were they? What's his approach?
Well, I don't want to, give away his what he's doing, but for example, in the book, the main character Cora is in an attic for 60 pages. And it's a very static scene. She has someone to talk to, and she can look out onto the square outside the house, and the scenes can be very interior in the book. But for a movie or a TV show, it's very static. And how do you make a scene like that into something dynamic? And he had a good solution, and he had some other solutions for things that make sense on the page, but not necessarily on the screen. And I think what clinched it, I was saying this earlier today on the radio, is that I never talked to a filmmaker before to interview them. And I asked him if he had seen if there are any slave movies he was going to use for inspiration. And he was like, slave movies? I was thinking There Will Be Blood and The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson. And I was like, well, I guess you got the job. Let's kind of stop there. So I'm not really involved. I sort of consult occasionally if he has a question or wants to run something by me, but it really is his. And I think that if you're going to give your book over to be adapted, you have to sort of give it over fully.
Do you think you'll visit the set when they're shooting? Or?
No, yeah, I think it'd be cool. I think they're filming in Georgia this summer and some other places, and it would be definitely very cool to see.
The first part is set in Georgia, so. And I was just thinking, like the Underground Railroad, John Henry Days about the African-American folk hero, a steel-driving man, taking a Pelham 123. What is it with you and trains?
I don't see the connection.
Of course you don't. Even an elevator. Even an elevator.
One.
The Intuitionist, an elevator.
Transportation.
It's a kind of vertical train.
Yes. Well, I didn't work on the horror movies in therapy, but next will be the train obsession.
Very Freudian, you know, in all those movies when they cut to the train. But
Yeah.
You're turning 50 this year. Is that a significant number for you?
40 was like whatever. 50 seems like, you know, I'm not going to see 100. So, you know, I have to cherish these days, you know.
My favorite line in Pelham is the subway dispatcher, Frank Correll. His line, screw the goddamn passengers. What the hell do they expect for their lousy 35 cents to live forever?
Yes, exactly.
Do you have a fave?
A
favorite from the movie? A favorite line?
Well, over this weekend, I think it's, you know, the cops are carrying the bags, and one cop says, "That's $1 million," and the other one says, "It's not what it weighs, it's what it buys." And I think that applies to a lot of things. I'm not sure.
We're going to go to audience Q&A. Please wait for the microphone to come to you. In the middle there? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I had a question regarding the process with which you know a novel starts and then becomes a novel. So in particular, what ideas can you tell are good ideas? How high is the failure rate for stuff that doesn't work? And so just a little bit of insight on how you work on things.
Yeah, I do a lot of outlining before I start. And so a lot of the scenes, the major characters, I have to know the ending before I start. And definitely that, you know, if I'm working on it for 6 or 9 months or a year before I start writing, it helps vet the idea. So I don't write 200 pages and then I'm like, oh, this is a dumb idea. I've done a lot of pre-work that sort of got rid of the bad ideas. With the Underground Railroad, I had the idea in the spring of the year 2000 and didn't commit to it until 2014. And because I kept thinking about it, I would finish a book and go back to the idea. That's an argument for its favor. It's, you know, it's sort of longevity in my imagination and its insistence that one day I do it. And occasionally I'll have ideas that aren't that great. And I'll finish a book and I'll have like 3 ideas and then 2 are obviously terrible. And they didn't survive. They didn't survive as long as some of the other ideas for books. So.
What are your thoughts on censorship? Like there were a few scenes in there. There's a few issues in the movie where you thought that they wouldn't be put in like in the present day. And like as a writer, are there ideas that you have, narratives that you have that you purposefully like choose not to share with the public? Like what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, not censorship, but you know, in putting something on a page, does it actually serve the story? I think, you know, I did the most wrestling with that with the book Sag Harbor, which was about growing up in the 80s, and there's a lot of pop culture. The main character sees himself through movies and film and music. And there are things that I like from 1985, but do they serve the character? Does Lottie Dottie by blanking, Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh serve the character, or a song by Run DMC? And so that, you know, I was considering where am I censoring what I like about pop culture and want to put on the page in a more self-indulgent way, as opposed to what can I find that actually serves the character from 1985. And so censorship, bad. I think we can all agree. In terms of my creative process and what goes on the page, does it actually serve the character, serve the story? And that goes for content and also commas and em dashes and adjectives. Does it deserve its space on the page?
Is this working? Yes. Well, first I wanted to say that I thought that the Underground Railroad was a very important book. And it was a very important book for me because it made me read a lot, or read some, about the Civil War and also about the history of slavery in America. And I thought that your book was actually very powerful. And it took me a while to recover from it, really. So I guess I would be interested, I'm interested in your thoughts on race when you watch a movie like Pelham 1, 2, 3. How do you look at that? And where do you sort of grade that? I tried to watch movies on TV that were about the Civil War or about race, and I found pretty well that it was all bad. And none of it I thought was, I don't remember seeing any thinking this is an honest movie about race. So I kind of wondered, like, what do you think about this movie from a racial perspective? And also what you think about where things are at in literature and in movies dealing with race today.
That's a broad question. I have many
I know
ideas
it's
about.
way too broad.
I have many ideas about race.
I
In
know.
terms of what do I feel when I see taking Pelham 1, 2, 3? Yeah, probably Walter Matthau's character growing up in the 20s, 30s as a cop in New York probably is kind of racist. And it's an accurate depiction of the racism and sexism. Is probably an accurate depiction of people who were working underground back then. I'll jump off to say an inaccurate depiction of race, say Gone with the Wind, and what I was fighting against when I was writing Underground Railroad and doing the research. I wanted to be faithful to the terribleness and brutality of slavery. I was going to write a very violent book, and that's true to what plantation life was. And I knew very early on it was not going to be, say, Gone with the Wind, a very famous cinematic depiction of slavery that's built on a white lady being self-actualized against plantation life. And we're supposed to feel bad for her when they're burning her house down. And I see it, I'm like, you should burn her fucking house down. She's a fucking slaver. And so we have different points of view when we come to racial depictions on the screen. And that's what I'm bringing to it.
Hi there. Thank you for coming. I guess I just had an observation about taking Pelham 1, 2, 3, and that it's quite a nuanced satire, I guess you could say, of like city politics and race relations and sort of the collapsing economy of the 70s. What do you make of the remake with John Travolta in the lead and Denzel Washington in the Walter Matthau role? I don't know if it had the same sort of nuance, but I just kind of want to know your thoughts in terms of him as a protagonist, Denzel Washington, in sort of a more, high-tech environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not someone who says like you can't do remakes. That remake was pretty terrible. I've seen this version like 12 times and that version once. There's no need for the extra action beats that became sort of standard in the 80s. There's no need for this complicated backstory for Denzel Washington. We know nothing about Walter Matthau in this version. He's a plot function. And if he lives on the screen, it's because of some of the dialogue that's not related to his background, and also Walter Matthau-ness. So that version is it's very bombastic and very much more of an action movie. There's some action in this movie. There's not a lot of explosions. There's an explosion in the novel that they took out, and I think they're very efficient in terms of the sort of violence in this movie.
Anything? Excuse me. Anything more?
Hi. Over here.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't see where the light was.
I just had some thoughts about like the recent Oscars and the whole idea that how movies can be, as you say, good or bad. To my mind, that a lot of that sort of broad judgment comes down to actually the writing, the actual the screenplay, and just kind of like I was thinking about how some movies get sort of determined to be poor or problematic, and how that kind of affects when you're writing like a novel, it's just one person who is sort of responsible for that novel. But of course there are millions, well not millions, but there's a lot of people, you see the credits with a movie, who then get sort of tarred, I guess, with the opprobrium that a movie might attract. And I just wondering if you had any thoughts about that as you're preparing to see your book kind of go towards be seen in a film.
Could you shorten that question a little bit?
Sure. I guess I'm wondering about the, how, if you have any thoughts about how, I guess, the book goes to, is brought to life by many people who, and then the effect that the story then has on the judgment that gets applied to the whole project.
Yeah, I mean, it's a collaboration, and I think this movie is the director, it's the great actors, it's the great casting agent who got all these people into a room and into a subway car, and it takes 100 people to make a movie, and I'm definitely not big on collaboration. I don't have the patience for the kind of human interaction that doing a film would require. I'm glad that someone like Barry Jenkins, who in the conversations I've had with him, seems to have a great aesthetic sense, but also people sense. I think he can pull together the kind of team that's necessary to put the book onto the TV screen. And I'm glad it's not my job. I think it takes a peculiar skill to translate a book into a screenplay. It takes a peculiar skill to take a screenplay and make it live on the screen. And it's definitely beyond me. So I salute anyone who works in film and can make something as polished as Moonlight, or taking Pelham 1, 2, 3. Even though Bob Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars, I think it deserved 4.
I think he called it classy trash. Was that the
Classy trash?
Yeah.
From the writer of Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
We have time for another question if there is one. Otherwise, I will
So, well, thanks a lot then.
thank Colson very much for coming. Thank
Thank
you all for
you.
coming.